The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. And today my guest is Dr. William Peters, who is best known now for his Shared Crossing project. That'll be the subject of a lot of what we talk about. I'm going to ask you for a kind of a take us through your academic life as a young guy and how you ended up, how did you become what you've become? What did you want to be when you grow up, and how did you become this? It's such an unusual work that you're doing. But your main work now is psychotherapy, isn't it?
Well, I'm a psychotherapist in grief and bereavement and end of life experiences, kind of spiritual experiences related to end of life and how they carry on into grief and bereavement processes.
And as you take on psychotherapeutic clients, is it with a particular referral for those kind of issues?
And originally, I was really locally based. And now, as you know, with COVID and telehealth and teletherapy, now I have clients call from all over. And I welcome that specifically because my specialty is so focused on, spiritual experiences at the end of life. And most of these, as we'll discuss, and I know you're well aware of, Nathan, a lot of these experiences, if you go to your typical mental health practitioner, they either won't know how to make sense of it, or they might even have a discounting or lack of appreciative label for it. So for me, most of my clients are increasingly dealing with spiritual awakenings around an experience they had around the death, primarily of a loved one, and the multitude of what we call shared crossing experiences, a sense that they remain connected and bonded to their departing loved one, and how do they make sense of that?
Well, you might imagine that some of the same people who might have had a unhappy experience with others in psychotherapy and counseling might also have that with clergy.
Yeah, I think that's true. Unfortunately, especially in these experiences that fall kind of outside the realm of what we consider to be normal human behavior. I mean, some
Yeah.
of these experiences they definitely fall into the category of mystical and transcendental, and that, that does blur the boundaries between what is psychotherapeutic and what is spiritual counseling.
Right.
Uh, and
Well,
I think I do both.
you're
So.
happy to live in that space, it sounds like.
Oh, very, very. Yeah. I think it's sad that in our mental health, we don't have an appreciation for the spiritual aspects of being human. I think that should be part of the way we assess people in mental health is, what is your spiritual life? What
Yeah.
is your relationship to a higher power or an existential sense for why you're here and what happens to you when you die?
Right. I don't know how you can do therapy. Mine has been pastoral counseling, but you have to ask people, what is it you want? What's your goal? And some sense of goal has to do with, do you think you're temporary or permanent? It, is your goal to get to the finish line of death and disappear, or what do you believe about higher power stuff? So AA has done such a good job of helping people for almost 100 years of feeling free to just say what's in your imagination about a higher power and then get on with it.
Yeah, agreed. I'm a big fan of the AA communities.
Well, I'm introducing you to people that don't know you. I think a lot of my audience, you might be someone that they're happy they tuned in and got to know. But would you give us a basic background? I know that at 17 you had a near-death experience, and then because I've worked in campus ministry most of my life, I'm always interested in how people move from late adolescence into adulthood and pick out what to study and what to become. Tell us
Yeah.
about
Yeah, so I grew up in a suburb of Silicon Valley, Los Altos, just I know you were at Stanford, so really about 15 minutes from that
Right.
campus,
Mhm.
and was living a pretty typical suburban life. I went to a Jesuit prep school in San Jose, Bellarmine College Prep.
Mhm.
And like I said, I was an athlete. I really identified as an athlete in high school. And then I had a high-speed skiing accident at 17 years old. It was Squaw Valley at the time, in Lake Tahoe. Now it's called Palisade Ski Area, and crushed my low back and was catapulted out of my body on impact, and saw my body on the ski slopes. I saw beautiful Lake Tahoe, was in no pain, saw, the continental United States, and then eventually that beautiful satellite view, if you will, of planet Earth. And then Earth disappeared, and I was sailing through a marvelous universe with a past life review going on all at the same time.
Uh-huh.
And then I entered into this tunnel that was kind of slinky, hazy, white, and eventually saw a pinprick of light in the distance. And it was at that point I realized that's what I was heading for. But more importantly, I realized I was dying. And I realized I'd been in this spot 1,000 times, before. And I realized, oh my gosh, my life is ending. And I started pleading with that light, because I called that light God, and said, God, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I'm not ready to die. And I was saying to myself, I didn't accomplish what I came here to accomplish. I had no idea what that was. I mean, that's like, not like I had to go back and do something or be something. I just knew that I had to go back because I didn't honor some agreement I had for incarnating. And I definitely say that now with a larger understanding of what a human experience is. At 17 years old, it was entirely reflexive and unconscious what I was pleading for. I did come back. As a result of that injury, I have lived in chronic pain and physical disability. Really, for the next 30 years after that, I received a good deal of healing in the last 10 years. But still, I mean, even now I'm on this interview, I've struggled with walking the last couple of weeks because I don't get good spinal energetic innervation to my feet, and sometimes I can injure myself. And so that's what I've lived with. So after that experience, I went to college at UC Berkeley, and was started out kind of as a normal guy. I was in a fraternity, but then things were just starting to fall apart in terms of my understanding with my pain and the loss of my identity as an athlete. I actually headed over to take classes at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, which,
That's where I graduated from. I didn't know that part of the story.
yeah, I mean, I was auditing classes, and I was probably the only undergraduate at Berkeley that was taking classes there in, philosophy, and I was asking questions. What's life all about? No, with this kind of destruction of who I thought I was and what I thought I'd do with my life. After that, I went to I got accepted to a program called the Jesuit International Volunteer Corps. And I was placed as a high school teacher in Central America. And that began a 4-year, really, series of posts in Guatemala and then in Peru, both during civil wars, working with refugees in Peru that had been displaced. This was quite a powerful experience to be there at that time. And I think the influence of the shamanistic kind of indigenous cultures also was very moving to me, because my near-death experience fit into their cosmology in a beautiful way. I didn't really dive into it. When they talked about journeying and what happens after death, it just made sense to me. Not that it's any different than my own Catholic upbringing about an afterlife and heaven and all the rest of it. It's just that they had more development and they did it more. They actually traveled more. So an important experience. I came back. I worked in St. Anthony's Foundation in San Francisco as a social worker, and the AIDS epidemic broke out. I was hired because I was fluent in Spanish to deal with immigrants, but then when the AIDS epidemic broke out, there were, thousands of gay men primarily being impoverished by the HIV virus, ending up in Skid Row. And it was there that I started working with people dying directly. Now, I was doing that in Peru as well during the Civil War there. But here, it was just an onslaught. Every
And what,
person.
what years were those?
That would have been 90, 91, 92.
All right.
89, 90, 91, 92. Yeah. And and so, and it was there that I had my first shared death experiences. I should say it was there that I first heard my shared death experiences, because I would work closely with these communities of men that were essentially accompanying their brothers to their death. Everybody knew they had, who was HIV positive, of which most of those men in that communities were in that part of town. They all knew. They were just waiting for their ticket to get called, and
Right.
so they were very close. And we, the St. Anthony's Foundation, provided food and counseling and what have you. So I give one example of an individual. Was called, I'll change his name to Brad. Brad came in one day and said, I'd been working with him quite a bit, and one person was dying in his community called Randy, and he said, Randy died this morning. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And he looked at me with his big blue eyes and said, oh, but it was so beautiful. And he went on to describe how this community of men were surrounding Randy as he was dying in this burned out building in South of Market, San Francisco. In those days, South of Market is not what it is today. It was really impoverished. And he said, as he died, they saw him rise out of his body, stop about 10 feet above his body, look at all of the men who had cared for him, and bowed and said, thank you for caring for me. I'm fine. I'm free of this body. And he left. And so as he was sharing the story with me, he was weeping, and and it just sounded so true to me. And like I said, this was very similar to the near-death experience I had. I had this high impact. I rose out of my body. I looked down at myself. I had no reason to think this was anything other than true. And I would hear more of these stories. And later, Nathan and I ended up working in Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco, where I would have similar experiences, became a psychotherapist during this time. And then in 2009, I met Dr. Raymond Moody. And I was coming to see him because I wanted to hear him talk about the near-death experience, because I shared one with you, but I had another one in 1993 from a blood imbalance where I had idiopathic thrombocytopenia, which is crashing platelets. So I was hovering above my body in the ICU for many hours, and I really had a sense that, well, whoever I call myself, I am not this body. So that was a second NDE because I was so close to death.
How old were you at that point?
That was 30 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. So when Raymond started speaking, he started out, he said, I know you all think I'm going to talk about the NDE today, but I'm going to talk to you about something else that's actually far more available to all of us, and it's the shared death experience. And it's identical to the NDE in terms of possible phenomena, leaving your body, out-of-body experience, heavenly realms, past life review, seeing the light, deceased relatives, beings of light, all of these features that we know from the studies of the NDE, he said, in his initial research, were also appearing in the shared death experience. So the shared death experience is this experience where somebody dies and a caregiver, a loved one, sometimes a healthcare provider, at bedside or remote, will report that they feel like they somehow shared in the transition of the dying person from their human existence into the initial stages of the afterlife. Well, when I heard that, And I just remember my body just shaking with like, oh my gosh, I've had these experiences.
I'm not
The
the only
first
one.
time I've heard it. Pardon
Yeah.
me?
I'm not the only one.
I'm not the only one. And I immediately went up to Raymond, excited, and I said, hey, how much research is being done on this? Because I've had these experiences. I worked in hospice, da da da. And he looked at me and he says, well, there's next to no research that I'm aware of on this phenomena. And I said, well, I'm going to start it because not only do I know about these experiences, I think I know how to enable them. So that began the Shared Crossing Project. In that moment, I said, I'm going to go back and start a research project on this. And I was fortunate. I was, living in Santa Barbara as a senior therapist at the Family Therapy Institute. And we have an emphasis, on those who want to do deeper study and research. The Institute supports that. So that was great. And we started the Shared Crossing Research Institute. And now that is now 12 years ago, and we've published in the major medical and academic journals on the shared death experience. I'm the first person to create the research-based typologies, our understanding of it in terms of its healing, in terms of the positive after effects, in terms of its positive influence on grief. All have been documented, and we're pleased with that. So, I think our real blessing was getting the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine to publish the first article ever on the shared death experience in their prestigious journal. And once that happened, the gates opened in terms of like people started coming forth in the medical community saying, we've known about these experiences. No one ever talks about them. Nurses were emailing us and thanking us and saying, now I can say to my senior, physicians here, it's in the literature. We have to talk about it. If someone's having this, we need to bring it to their attention. It's a breach of practice now that the research has affirmed these experiences for us not to talk about them. So that's the long-winded answer to your question there, Nathan.
All right. Well, I didn't anticipate I was going to talk about this, but I have a story to tell of being in the room with one of those. Uh, I lived next door to my dad's parents, and my grandmother was a mystic. She walked around the house talking to especially Saint Joseph, the carpenter, and Anthony of Padua. And uh, I was one of 5 kids, but for whatever reason, I was it. She needed to talk to somebody about her experiences. And when I would visit, I just understood at like 7 years old that I need to sit still and listen to what she has to say. She kept a scrapbook of, well, you remember when the Catholic charismatic movement hit the church around 1968, 69?
I do.
People started having uncommon spiritual experiences that were at the parish level. You know, it wasn't just remote, weird folk. It was just ordinary people at prayer speaking in tongues and having gifts of healing and different things. There was a newspaper article in the local Catholic paper, and she started clipping them out and saving them all because she felt validated that all of her life she'd had experiences that were outside the norm. And she was telling those to this 7-year-old. And I remember her. Do you know? Are you familiar with the Catholic practice or the devotion to Saint Joseph as the patron of a happy death?
I'm familiar with it, but go over it just to remind me of the key points
If
there.
you remember in the Bible stories, Joseph is there in Matthew's gospel having all these dreams because he's like the Old Testament coat of many colors guy that interpreted dreams back in Egypt for Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Joseph in the New Testament story is told in dreams that this baby's coming and so on, and they fly off to Egypt to keep him safe. And then there's that one story in Luke where they are at the temple in Jerusalem, and the 12-year-old Jesus gets lost and found, and that's the last Joseph has ever heard of. He just disappears from the story. Mary's
Yeah.
at the foot of the cross, but Joseph disappeared. So the presumption in the early church was that he died somewhere along the way, and he must have died with Mary on one side of the bed and Joseph on the other. I mean, Jesus on the other.
Yeah.
it became this idealized death, that if
Mm.
you were going to have a perfect death, you'd have Jesus and Mary hovering over you while you died. And so he becomes the patron of a happy death. Well, my grandmother told me, she said, I have a secret to tell you. I'm praying to St. Joseph for my happy death. And this is the way I want it. Your grandfather is much older than I am. He was 17 years older than her. And I need to stay here to take care of him. But as soon as he goes, I want to go right behind him. And uh, and then fast forward to my senior year of college, I was home for Christmas. It was January 4th. We were called, I was studying nursing home administration of all things, and they were in a nursing home. And my aunts were both Dominican nuns, the same order that I belong to. And one of them was at my house, my parents' house, having breakfast when we got a call from the nursing home saying, come right away. Well, we figured that means somebody's dying. And we got there, and in fact, my grandmother couldn't swallow. And so they had this ethical question about, do you want us to cut a hole in her abdomen to force feed her something because she'll die if we don't? And that seemed like this big ethical dilemma until it's right in front of you. You go, why in the world? She was in dementia. Why would we want to prolong this? But the nurse said, okay, well, I've got to go do the paperwork. I'll be back in a minute. So my grandfather is more or less comatose in the other bed, side by side. And my aunt, Sister Maximus was her name, was standing at the foot of the bed. And now I'm focused on my grandmother because we just made this decision on her behalf. So now I'm completely focused on her. And then Sister Maximus says, look over here. And I looked at her, and she took her hands. I'm pointing down toward my belt line and up through my abdomen and my lungs. And she said, I just watched Daddy leave. And I was looking the other way, so I didn't see what she saw. And I don't know whether I would have or not. But anyway, she reported that she watched him leave. And then the nurse came in moments later with her paperwork. And we said, before we look at that, would you look over here? I had just been taught that, you test for a pulse. And then the other thing was to put your finger under the nose to see if there's any air going in and out. And I did both. And I said, I've never done this before, but I think he's dead. And then the nurse came over and said, oh my God, you're right. He's died. So we had whatever that was. It sounds like my aunt at least had a bit of a shared death experience.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, anyway, you ended up becoming this person who sort of legitimized the field and brought some academic heft to it and journal articles and so on. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mentioned the articles that came out, or the article that came out in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, also published in the Omega Journal of Death Studies, which is really the principal international journal, academic journal, multidisciplinary on death and dying. And so that article our team published on the spectrum of end-of-life experiences, the shared crossing spectrum of end-of-life experiences. And what the reason I wanted to get this out there is because there are so many experiences, spiritual experiences. And by the way, in the field, there's different disciplines have different names for these experiences. They can be called end-of-life experiences, spiritual, extraordinary spiritual experiences, paranormal experiences, non-ordinary experiences, all these names. But we use end-of-life experiences just because it makes sense that they are end-of-life experiences. And quite frankly, I don't think they're so extraordinary. In fact, where I look at it, they're more common than they are not. And when you hear the numbers, you'll say, wow, really? Because what I first found was, and this came to me first clinically, and then we did lit reviews and figured out, oh my gosh, this stuff is validated already in the literature. It just needs to be coalesced. So, you start with pre-death premonitions. And a lot of people have premonitions of their own death and that of a loved one. And sometimes we're scared by our own premonitions.
Mhm.
The sense that, we have premonitions about all sorts of things, but they're far more common than we know of. And that's the first in the continuum of these end-of-life experiences. So the pre-death premonitions, and then comes up is pre-death visions or visitations. They're often called pre-death dreams, but I don't like the term dreams because dreams means something completely different. As a psychotherapist, dreams are often incoherent, fragmented. People are distorted. They don't have a clear message. When we have end of life, or as we call them, pre-death visions or visitations, these are coherent visitations or visions, typically of our deceased relatives who have showed up to greet us, to tell us essentially, we got this, you're
Yes.
dying, don't worry about it. Your relatives and friends are gathering for you. It's easy. And these visions or visitations provide comfort for the dying. And the research on this is about 80 to 90% of, of people in inpatient hospices will report having these. And that research is done by Dr. Christopher Kerr out of Buffalo Hospice. So anyway, then the next experience we see is the shared death experience, which I've already defined.
Yes.
And then on the flip side of death are all these visions and visitations again. And there's different types. I'll just do a broad brush of them. But it typically goes like this. You know, the surviving loved ones, caregivers are, going to bed, and all of a sudden, the recently deceased appears at the foot of their bed, typically elevated. They look young and happy and healthy and familiar. And they say to them something like, hey, you see that I've died. I'm alive and well. I'll be with you always. And just wanted to thank you for, being a loving caregiver. And they're gone. And we see that in about 50 to 55% of our shared death experiencers, that they'll report those as well. So you can see, as a clinician, someone would come into me with an experience, and they may not have the lexicon down. I think I had a shared death experience because when I died, because when my mother died, my deceased father showed up and told her that everything was going to be okay. Well, that's not a shared death experience. That's a pre-death vision or visitation. And likewise, someone would say, I had this shared death experience, but I want to tell you something else. After I was escorting my grandmother across the veil, and I saw my great grandfather there to greet her, and then, my gosh, the light was beautiful, and I felt the sublime feelings were incredible. Well, then a couple of days later, she showed up on my bed to say thank you to me. Like, I was going to bed and she was right there. So what I'm sharing is that there's all these experiences that occur that are really not known to our general public. And so the research was done to validate these experiences, which we have now done. And I should also say that we just recently published an article in the Journal of Near-Death Studies comparing the near-death experience to the shared death experience. And that's a great article, I think, because it really does point out how these two experiences are suggesting that this afterlife, life after death reality is validated from two different perspectives: a person who has a brush with death, and a caregiver who's watching somebody die enter into that space. So that's extremely compelling, and that has stirred up a lot of interest. In other researchers are saying, wow, it's great that you could draw these comparisons. And we could. It was easy. I mean, we have hundreds of cases that we've studied. So that's really what we do now. And of course, I lecture and teach and about this at different conferences, and to hospice and palliative care providers, end of life workers of all kinds. And the big news is that we are now working to get the first major documentary film out about this. So that will be what we're working on for the next year or so. This is a big endeavor. So if your viewers are interested in learning about that, and maybe even assisting in some way, that would be great. We're looking, we have a filmmaker now. But yeah, this is a big project. So,
Good.
and by the way,
That was one of the things I wanted to know. You've done so many things already, but a guy as interesting as you've got to have some project that's cutting edge or the thing you haven't done yet?
Yes, this is all new. Like I just this fall, after we were together at the IONS conference in Arlington, Nathan, I was just then that I was starting to explore this film development option, and so now, and there's been a good deal of interest from quality filmmakers because, as one filmmaker said to me yesterday, he says, "This is the greatest question that human beings have been addressing if they're conscious for the millenniums, and that is, what happens to us after we die?" I mean,
Yeah.
this is a huge question. And yet our modern society just has a knee-jerk reaction to say something like, well, we all know we're going to die, but it's off in the distance. And so it never gets the attention it deserves. And that has led us to these really poor end-of-life situations that are more reactive than they are consciously prepared for. And with that reality leaves us in a state of not dying well.
Yes. Well, you might be a little familiar with the work that I've been given to do is with people that died sudden violent deaths that did not die in a hospice or with some kind of
Yeah.
that just went from the consciousness you or I are in at the moment, and that our listeners and viewers are, and then being out of body and not nearly dying, but like, my first book is on the Wizard of Oz, and the coroner and Munchkinland, she's not only merely dead, she's really most sincerely dead. That these people, my folk, die. And you were talking about dreams earlier. I make a distinction between having a dream or receiving a dream, because having a dream for me is my psychobabble, and receiving a dream is a different consciousness. It's people coming in a dream state, in that consciousness state, and showing me the way they died without making it too ghastly, but they give me the basics of the car crash or the shooting or whatever it was, and then dealing with them and being able to talk with them. And
Yeah.
and then we never tell their stories out loud in public without going back one more time to ask permission. And then, without really probing, it's kind of like, what's new? What's happened since the last time we saw you? And they'll give us these cool updates about things they've been doing. And so I have 3 books in that series. The most recent one just came out last week on Amazon. It's called Afterlife Interrupted, Book 3, Please Let Me Explain, because some of the stories are so explanative that they just needed to be in a book, I thought.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And just so you know, our research validates what you found and what you're writing about is that these spirits, when they disincarnate, they desire, from what we can tell, at least some of them, to continue a relationship. I mean, there's a whole therapy now called continuing bonds, which is really about helping the bereaved reshape their relationship with the dying, and
Yeah.
it's often based on these dreams that are received. To use your language, it's the dreams they receive from their departed loved ones that tell them where they are, what they're doing, and the type of relationship they want to have with their surviving loved ones.
I grew up with it naturally in this little Catholic family that was super Catholic, and not just rules and regulations, but spiritual practice. I was learning spiritual practice, in my mother's milk, and how to talk to my other family is the way she put it. You know,
Yeah.
Prayer was how to talk to our other family, and she led me into that, at bedtime, and so I just knew how to do it. The work that I've been given to do, it lines up with a lot of things that are in Catholic cult. Uh,
Oh.
there's a lot of the people that come to me they needed help because they died so abruptly and awfully. And you, as a psychotherapist, would know that people are walking around with lots of unresolved stuff, and maybe they're approaching death gives them the opportunity to work on their business before they leave, but not if you leave so abruptly that you're yanked out of your life. And so sometimes they need to do something somewhat psychotherapeutic on the other side. They just need to come to truth, and that's a large part of counseling, is helping people see the truth of things. um, anyway, and then the idea of Catholic patronage of the saints. Somebody that loved teaching becomes the patron of teachers. Somebody
Yes.
who loves gardening becomes the patron of that. I see the same thing where people who, on the other side, who loved something here, loved it so much that they didn't want to leave it behind. They found another application for it on the next plane or planes, some other way to continue loving service, serving people. And then I think you might be interested in meeting my baby sister, who's my editor. She's writing a book right now on what she calls your afterlife birthday party. Um,
Wow.
if a person in the Catholic network becomes canonized, not very many people do, but those who do, the people in charge of that process try to put your day on the calendar somewhere so that there's a feast of Saint William of Santa Barbara. What day what day are we going to put his feast? Well, the default is the anniversary of your death. Whatever day you died on is the default. Now, if you die on Christmas Day, you're not going to get December 25th. It's already taken. But they'll try to put your feast day on the day of the anniversary of your death because it's your birth into everlasting life, into eternity. So it's your birthday, your afterlife
Yes.
birthday. And Catherine has done some stuff when our mother was dying on, well, need to get you ready for your birthday party. She was on her sick bed, she was on her deathbed, and said, "We need to get your party started. Who do you, what kind of food do you want? What kind of music? Who do you want to have there?" And it enables people to take some of the fearful ideation out of their approaching death by helping them focus on something happy that will come afterwards. So anyway, she's writing that book right now.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Hey, we're getting near the end. One thing I like to ask when I'm doing these kind of shows is, you're on a lot of podcasts, I'm sure. Is there something you want to talk about that I didn't ask, or anything that would just be fun for you?
Well, I think one of the questions that comes up a lot is, so the shared death experience is a wonderful experience. It's, in my estimation, I think those who've had it as well, um, feel like it's one of the best experiences they've ever had. In fact, for most people, they'll say it's shocking that the moment of most grief and pain, the loss of a loved one, is also paradoxically or ironically the moment at which they have the most meaningful, spiritual, awe-inspiring, sublime experience of their life. So the question comes up, well, how do you make these experiences happen? Can
Yeah,
you make them happen? What makes them happen? Well, I'll say from stage one, we don't know what makes them happen, but we are learning. And one thing I can say is that being receptive to death helps,
mhm,
knowing that it's a natural part of life. Also, knowing that these experiences happen another way to bring this apart. And we do have trainings about this as well. It's called our Pathway program, which we're not offering again until later next spring. But the other thing we really work on, and you alluded to this in your work with the tragic death spirits on the other side, that is, it helps to work on your unfinished business. It helps to do your spiritual, psycho-emotional inventory, not just as you approach death, but since we never know when we're going to die, or never know when our loved ones are going to die, do it now.
yeah,
And so those practices are important. And then the last thing I'll say is, there are methods that we teach, and I'll help you with this a bit, just one short one. And that is really envision, choreograph, if you will, your death and the death of your loved one or loved ones. And imagine, if you're the one dying, as you transition, calling people to be with you, calling your loved ones to be with you. And if you are a caregiver loved one, make yourself, apply your prayer or meditation or mindfulness practices so that you're able to feel, sense, and discern different sensations as they come across your being, because there's a lot of energetic experiences that happen at the end of life. And if you can discern what they are and notice that there's an invitation in some of these. If you feel a pull on yourself, or like the change of light or in the room, or the change in dimension of the room, and you kind of lean your consciousness into it, then you'll increase your capacity to have these.
Right.
So, and like I said, we train people. I mean, I know people will ask, well, do you work directly with people? And I do. Right now, I am actually, I'll be taking clients in the middle of January again, if people want to work directly with me. So if you have someone who's listening who is dying themselves, or has someone who's getting close to death, and you don't have to be dying. I work with a lot of people with terminal illnesses that don't know if they're dying in the next few months, but they know that it's going to be within a few years. I can definitely help with that, giving kind of, private, customized consultations for
And you
people.
do that like we're doing this on some.
Just do it on Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that's the beauty of Zoom. I mean, now I work with people literally all over the world, and
Yes.
it's really wonderful.
It was a sideways gift of the pandemic, because people who thought they'd break the computer if they touched it learned how to do Zoom. And so I'm on Zoom a lot now.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I want to give a just an opportunity for you to mention. I was on the website, and it's one of the best organized websites I think I've ever seen, in terms of making it just so easy to play a little short video, or it's
Yeah.
very personal. Anyway, kudos to you and whoever put your media together, because it's very well done. So
Well, thank you. Nathan, I want to say that thanks for bringing that up, because if people want to see shared death experiences and say, well, what do these really look like, and hear personal accounts, we have interviewed over 500, deeply interviewed, just like you and I are talking right now on Zoom, usually 90 minutes to 2-hour interviews. And then we distill them down to a few. I mean, I teach in different ways. Sometimes, what you'll see on our website is 3 to 5 minute accounts
right.
of people just taking the high points. That's a good way to learn what we're doing. And I know for your audience here, Nathan, that there will be people listening who've had a shared death experience or a post-death visitation, of import. And we'd encourage you to send your case to us. We have an online portal. It's on the contact page of our website. You'll see, share your story, and you can share it with us. And then one of our researchers will get back to you. And the people love the research, love to share their stories. So,
I'd like to
yeah.
add one thing on top of that. Is sometimes I hear people that are sad or upset that, well, she came to my sister, but not to me. Why did mom talk to her, not to me? I just try to say to people, in English, the word you is singular and plural. And
That's right.
you and I are both an individual and a part of a group. And don't think that the gift that was given to the other person was not given to you because it came to her and not to you. It's just not necessary to demand these kind of experiences happen to you the way you want them to happen. The spirit doesn't move quite that way, in my experience.
It really doesn't. You're right. And that is often an issue of family discussion. Uh, why did my brother get the visitation from my mom? I thought I was her favorite.
Yeah, exactly. Just give that a rest. You'll be happier if you don't think those kind of
Yeah.
thoughts. You know. Well, so what's the website?
The website is sharedcrossing.com. I should also say that I've written a book published last year by Simon & Schuster. It's the first research-based book on the shared death experience. It's called At Heaven's Door, which shared journeys to the afterlife teach about dying well and living better. And that you can find anywhere.
Well, today my guest has been to William Peters. Just delightful to get to know you a little bit. And for all of my listeners and viewers, thank you for being a part of today's podcast. Remember, I'm praying for you and those you love. God bless. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.